Okay, my name is Dr. Adam Chapman. I'm a lecturer in medieval history at the Institute of Historical Research, but I'm also the principal editor of the Victoria County History of England, a project which aims to track the history of every place in England from the earliest times to the ever-moving now. Just on this screen, you can see my contact details. If you've got any questions for the project or for me, then please drop me a line afterwards and we'll see what we can do. Victoria County History, or the VCH as we generally call it, was begun in 1899. Its aim was really very simple, which was to do a history of every parish, as they then thought of places in England, from the earliest times to the ever-moving now. And this is something we've continued to the present. There are some major differences, however. We thought that once upon a time you could do every county in England in 4 volumes, an introductory volume, which gave you things like the geology, the social and economic history, the history of what they then called early man, which we'd now call archaeology, all these sort of standard antiquarian sections which you find in lots of 19th century antiquarian histories. Where the VCH was different in that it also aimed to include histories of every place in each county, so on a parish by parish basis. The VCH today is much more than that. We still produce the big red books of county histories on a topographical basis. But again, still using that parish by parish model. The parish is still the basic unit of our historical inquiry, as it is the basic unit of record keeping and local government. In addition to the big red books, we also produce short paperbacks based on individual places, and a lot of these are available online. The importance of the VCH, as most archaeologists will know, is for its coverage, the breadth of its coverage. We cover absolutely everything in a very stratified, very consistent way. Have histories of land ownership, histories of the economic life of the area, the social history of the parish, its religious history, including architectural descriptions of the principal buildings, and indeed these days, and pretty much any history we've published since the Second World War, an account of settlement and the historical evidence of how that's come to be. So who's it for? Well, broadly defined, the academic community. It's a work of reference. We aim to be encyclopedic rather than definitive. So that includes archaeologists, of course, it includes historians, it includes geographers and many people in other academic disciplines, but also heritage professionals, including those in contract archaeology, planners, and people interested in locality. None of that should undermine its utility for people who actually live in the places we're describing. And the key thing I put on lots and lots of people's copy is, how does this history relate to the people who actually live there today? We are writing not just for ourselves, but for the wider community. And an awful lot of the work now is produced with volunteer labour. So the work is embedded in these local communities too. Because we've been going for over a century, some of the work we've done actually provides a primary source for what material, places, buildings were like a century ago. This example here shows how some of that material has been used. This largely 15th century brick-built building, somewhere in Hertfordshire, has been used by an architectural student looking at reusing historic and listed buildings. And they've used the drawings we've supplied to make a cardboard model as a basis for their explorations. So the VCH of the 21st century looks a bit like this. It's not a consistent picture, but this is a pretty good idea of what we do. It is and remains academically rigorous. Our work is peer-reviewed. It uses literature from all sorts of different academic specialisms, including archaeological reports, the Grey Lit, reports by Historic England and their predecessors, the Royal Commission material, and consultation with experts in the localities, vernacular buildings groups, all those sorts of things, as well as county archives, national archives, the British Library, and all sorts of documentary repositories. It is predominantly volunteer-led. We've got 14 counties currently active, which is the most since the First World War. These are generally supported by county trusts, who are charitable bodies, which aim to support, produce, and fundraise to make the work possible. But it is also professionally supported. We employ a small central team in the University of London at Senate House. a number of historians on retainer contracts and some early career researchers doing specific research jobs on specific areas and communities. All our work is published in print initially, but there are a variety of digital and electronic offers, and one of those we're going to talk about today. And that is the VCH app, a history of English places, which is developed in partnership with AIMA Media. The point of the app is very much to, which we'll come to in more detail in a moment, is to divorce the traditional divide between the digitised versions of the Victoria County history texts and the geography. Because the way we've done this via British History Online, and you'll find volumes, particularly the early volumes available via repositories like archive.org, is that you digitise a book as a lump. And that's fine in the library. It's not so great on the road. It's not so great if you're in a place and you think, well, what is that building over there? I know this county the VCH are active in. How do I find out more? So what we've done is to break down those divisions between books by planting the content we've already created onto a map. So it's always dangerous trying to run a video on a presentation, but let's see how this works. So, a history of English places is designed, as I've said, to break down those divides between how a book is put together and how the world actually is lived. So we have 13,712 places in England which are defined geographically. And that definition is by putting a pin in the middle of the geographical bounds of a parish. That parish detail is from Caelan Oliver's stupendous work on mapping parish boundaries in 2010. And the idea is that anywhere has a history which you can access with. VCH obviously doesn't have a national coverage. We've been going 120 years now, but we've still only done about a third of the parishes in England. You can do the maths to how long it's going to take to finish the job. But even then, we're probably going to have to start again, as we have around in the area around Basingstoke and Hampshire, where we're currently revisiting the history of that town and its surrounding area, because when we published it in 1907, the town was yet to be rebuilt for the early 20th century. It was rebuilt and expanded again in the 1930s and became a sort of expanded or new town in the 1960s. At each phase, we gave another range of architectural and archaeological investigation and massive change. So the town we wrote about in 1907 really no longer exists. That said, this poses an obvious problem. What do we do for the other 2/3 of the parishes? Well, we've used Lewis's Topographical Dictionary of 1848, which provides a basic introduction to every place in England, and that is available on the app for free. So the app is available to download. It's for both iOS and for Android operating systems. You can download the basic app, which gives you the mapping, which is based on the first edition of the Ordnance Survey from the 1870s through to the 1890s. And the Lewis Topographical Dictionary entries on that. That gives you a very basic overview. If you want to access the VCH content on the move for free, there's a modest subscription and a wee plug. It's during the duration of the Festival of Archaeology, there's 50% off. So what was a modest subscription is now around about a tenner, is now just under a £5. So using the app is quite straightforward, really. You can search by a location or place name. Be aware that there's a standardization of spelling, which may not be how the Ordnance Survey has it today, but was current at the time in 1848 when most of the material was put in. So if you do that, you can find where you are. You can also show location if you turn on the geotagging, which puts you gives you a little blue dot on the screen, which tells you where you are, and also shows labels the 10 nearest places, the 10 nearest parishes. There's a VCH logo in that label, 3 lions or leopards, I suppose strictly they are. That means your VCH content is available, but you still get the Lewis material regardless. You can obviously scroll around the map and zoom and focus on specific details. But since it's Climate Takeover Day, let's talk about some of the ways in which the VCH shows material relating to climate and climate change. The material we have available through the app is also available via British History Online. which is a bit of a faff to find from a mobile phone, and it doesn't actually work all that well. So to start with, looking at industry and the drivers of climate change. And where better to start in the Black Country, north of Birmingham. This is West Bromwich in Staffordshire. And we've produced under the economic history of the area, that economic history delineated by types of industry. And we can see on the little screenshot from the app available, you can see 2 collieries, one of which is inactive, a steel and ironworks, a mission church, and the sort of kind of industrial housing and railways which you come to associate with the West Midlands. These things represent the kind of things that have brought climate change about and developed its rate, but also a large amount of embodied carbon in the landscape. What you might find in archaeological survey work is tons and tons of ash, tons and tons of colliery spoil, tons and tons of waste, and it's useful to know where that is and at what point it was active. More prosaically, but far more common, is the impact of water, the impact of weather and climate. The example shown here is from East and West Ham, now in the East End of London, but when we wrote about it, and was in the far western reaches of Essex. One thing to bear in mind of the Victoria County history is that we use the definitions of county and parish boundaries that were current in the 1850s. 2 reasons for this. One, the changes since have clouded the issue rather a lot, particularly after 1974. The second reason is that the material is generally arranged in archival contexts according to those earlier definitions, because that's when the bulk of records were created. Here we see the impacts of flooding. Throughout history, certainly floods mentioned in the Middle Ages, all the way through to the Great Flood up and down the East Coast in 1953. So you can see how water is impacted on this landscape from a period of around about 1,000 years, if not longer. And this is also included in work we're about to produce. This is Walton on the Naze in northeast Essex, and shows the erosion of a cliff. We know from Domesday Book that one estate on the Naze was described as consumpta per mare, that is consumed by the sea, in 1086. And the pillbox, you can see the row of pillboxes represent just 80 years worth of erosion on this coast. So what have we lost? We don't know. This is a site which is obviously potential for, say, an Iron Age promontory fort. We don't know if such a thing existed, or indeed when it was lost. We don't know how big the Naze was, but what we can do is record what we do know, what was observed in the past, and how we can see it today. That's one of the advantages of moving to the ever-moving now. One thing to bear in mind is that we have worldwide reach through internet-based resources and British History Online. The red on this map shows where stuff from VCH was accessed on BHO. Only a few fairly minor gaps in terms of European population, that is Greenland, and a few more predictable ones elsewhere. If you want to know more, details can be found on this page. There's a link to the History of England Places app, the VCH web pages, and our home, the Centre for the History of People, Place and Community. And of course, you can follow us on Twitter at VCH_London and at CHPPC_IHR. Thank you very much.